The mission felt wrong from the start. Lieutenant Kane Orson, an experienced pilot for the Interstellar Union, had faced countless assignments, from patrolling the outer edges of known space to escorting diplomats through hostile territories. But this, transporting Ira, the daughter of a high-ranking Vey dignitary, was a different breed of challenge. The Vey, an advanced alien race, looked down on humans, viewing them as useful only for menial tasks. And Ira, she was infamous for her deep-seated loathing of his kind. The moment Ira stepped aboard the Tempest, Kane felt the temperature plummet. Her violet eyes, cold and unyielding, scanned him with the intensity of disdain. Dressed in flowing robes that echoed her regal status, her silver hair gleamed like cascading moonlight. But her beauty was marred by the scornful scowl that never seemed to leave her face. "I can't believe I'm forced to travel on a human vessel," she sneered, her voice laced with venom. "Are we truly so desperate that we entrust our lives to these creatures?" Kane clenched his jaw, biting back a retort. His orders were clear: get Ira to the Union's capital safely and on time, with zero hostility, no matter the provocation. He forced a polite nod. "Welcome aboard the Tempest, Lady Ira," he said, keeping his tone steady. "I'll be your pilot for this journey. We'll depart shortly." She turned her back without a word, dismissing him entirely as her guards followed her to the guest quarters, their glares leaving a trail of animosity in their wake. Kane sighed as the doors closed. "This is going to be a long trip," he muttered under his breath. The Tempest, while a reliable vessel, was no luxury liner. Built for speed and maneuverability, it was armed only with reinforced plating for defense. Kane ran last-minute system checks, unease gnawing at him. Ira's hostility was one thing, but beneath her contempt lay something hidden. Something deeper than a disdain for humans. But speculating wasn't his job. His job was simple: get her to her destination. Once they were airborne, Kane set the autopilot and double-checked the star charts. The route was straightforward, and if all went well, they'd arrive in 2 days. Deciding to keep himself busy, he headed to the engine room to run diagnostics. But moments later, the door slid open, and there she was, arms crossed, gaze sweeping the room. Kane straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Something I can help you with, Lady Ira?" She met his eyes, sharp and calculating. "Is this all your species is capable of? Machines and tools. No wonder your people are so mundane." Suppressing a retort, Kane responded evenly. "We make do with what we have." She scoffed, stepping deeper into the room. "It's no wonder your kind remains stagnant. The Vey harness the very energies of the universe, while you fumble with these crude mechanisms." "Maybe it's not as advanced as what you're used to," Kane said, "but it gets the job done." For a brief moment, her gaze softened, almost curious, though she'd likely never admit it. "You amuse me, human. Perhaps that's why my father deemed you suitable for this task. Your simplicity makes you predictable." Kane's patience was wearing thin. "If I'm so predictable, why waste your time here?" Ira's eyes flashed with a mix of irritation and something else, a crack in her icy demeanor that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Do not presume to question me, pilot," she said, voice cold. "I came to see if this vessel was as primitive as I expected." "It is." She turned and left, leaving Kane alone, fists clenched at his sides. It was only day 1 of the journey, and it already felt like an eternity. Chapter 2: A Dangerous Encounter. Hours passed, but the tension only grew heavier. Ira's earlier words echoed in Kane's mind, her disdain hanging over him like a shadow. He wasn't one to care about the opinions of spoiled diplomats, yet something about her seemed off. It was as if behind her arrogance, she was hiding something. As he kept watch in the cockpit, the proximity alarm blared, jolting him to full attention. His hands flew over the controls. What the... An unknown vessel was fast approaching, its massive, predatory form filling the sensors. This was no Union ship, nor any ally. Its size dwarfed the Tempest, and it moved with lethal precision. Kane activated the shields and sent a distress signal, knowing help was far out of reach. Switching to comms, he called out, "This is Lieutenant Kane Orson of the Interstellar Union. You're in a restricted zone. Identify yourself." Static crackled over the speakers. No response. Kane braced himself, punching commands to increase speed. The Tempest lurched forward, engines roaring as they strained to evade the intruder. Just then, the cockpit door burst open, and Ira stormed in, fury etched across her face. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Glad you could join us," Kane shot back, fingers flying over the controls. "We're being pursued by an unidentified ship. They're not responding to comms and closing fast. I'm trying to get us out of here." She glanced at the display, assessing the situation. "These ships are faster. If you let me take control." "We're in my ship," Kane interrupted, his patience fraying. "And I'm doing everything I can to keep us alive." For a moment, Ira looked ready to argue, but her gaze shifted to the red warning lights on the screen, and she clenched her fists. Suddenly, a plasma blast tore past them, missing the Tempest by inches. Kane veered into a steep dive, dodging the next attack. "They're trying to disable us," Ira muttered, eyes fixed on the rear camera. "They want to take us alive." "Not if I have any say in it," Kane growled, twisting the ship into erratic maneuvers to evade their attackers. Another plasma shot grazed their shields, sending a shudder through the hull. Kane clenched his teeth, pushing the engines to their limit, aware they were no match for the massive vessel on their tail. But Ira stepped forward again, her tone steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "You're not going to outrun them," she said. "You need to fight." Kane's brow furrowed. "We're outgunned. This isn't a battle we can win." Her gaze hardened. "You don't have to win. Just survive long enough to get help." At that moment, the proximity alarm blared again, this time signaling incoming weapons fire. The ship lurched violently as a blast struck the shields, and Kane's heart pounded. "Fine," he muttered, flipping the switch to power up their limited armaments. "But don't say I didn't warn you." The Tempest's laser cannons fired, bolts of energy streaking toward their pursuer. The shots hit, but the enemy's shields absorbed the blasts without a flicker. Kane gritted his teeth. "That went well." Ira's expression remained stoic, though her shoulders tensed. "Their shields have a weak point," she said. "Near the rear thrusters. If you can get us in position, we might be able to exploit it." Kane eyed her warily. "You're awfully knowledgeable about enemy ship weaknesses." But she said nothing, lips pressed into a thin line. There wasn't time to question her further. Kane dove beneath the enemy vessel, lining up a shot at the rear thrusters. As he fired, the shields flickered and buckled. "Got it!" he shouted, adrenaline surging through him. But the victory was short-lived. A blast struck the Tempest directly, alarms blaring as the shields faltered. "Shields are down!" Kane yelled, struggling to reroute power. "There's an asteroid field up ahead," Ira said, her tone steadier than her expression. "If we can make it inside, we might lose them." Without hesitation, Kane veered toward the asteroid field, the enemy ship closing in as plasma fire rained around them. "Hold on!" he shouted, diving into the dense maze of asteroids. The Tempest wove and dodged, its hull groaning under the stress. Kane's knuckles turned white as he steered through the chaotic field, glancing back at the enemy ship, hoping for a chance to escape. "You're a better pilot than I gave you credit for," Ira murmured, a rare hint of acknowledgement in her voice. Kane didn't respond, his focus locked on navigating the treacherous asteroid field. A massive chunk of rock loomed ahead, and he pulled the ship into a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding collision. Behind him, the enemy ship wasn't as lucky. It clipped the asteroid's edge, scattering debris into the void. "Guess we're not as predictable as you thought," Kane muttered under his breath. For now, they had a brief reprieve, but he knew it wouldn't last. They were stranded in hostile space, with a damaged ship and no sign of backup. Kane couldn't shake the sinking feeling that this mission was just beginning to spiral out of control. The Tempest drifted silently within the asteroid field, the cold, dark rocks offering temporary cover from the massive predator still scanning for them. Kane checked the ship's diagnostics, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. Shields were down, weapons barely functional, and the engine strained from evasive maneuvers. They were, essentially, sitting ducks. Ira, seated in the co-pilot's chair, looked unusually focused. Gone was the scornful superiority, replaced by a calculated concern. Her usual icy demeanor seemed to melt under the pressure of survival. "We can't stay here for long," she said, urgency lacing her words. "Their scanners will recalibrate, and when they do, they'll find us." Kane didn't need the reminder. Their situation was bleak. No real way to fight back, no viable escape route, and no help on the horizon. "So, any bright ideas?" he asked, glancing at her as he assessed their dwindling options. "We're outgunned, outmaneuvered, and just about out of time." Ira's gaze fixed on him, her lips pressed into a thin line. "There is one option left." Kane raised an eyebrow, wary. "Go on." "We need to send a distress signal to the Vey fleet." "They'll come for me," she replied, her voice steady but carrying an edge of vulnerability. Kane blinked, surprised. "The Vey? You really think they'll save both of us?" Her violet eyes narrowed, hesitation flickering across her face before she answered. "They'll save me. You are—" She paused, disdain briefly creeping into her tone. "An unfortunate necessity. For now." Kane crossed his arms, holding back a retort. Of course, she would think only of herself. He doubted the Vey would lift a finger for him unless it directly tied to her safety. Still, this plan was better than waiting to be found. "And what if they don't get here in time?" "We're hardly in a position to negotiate," Kane said, his tone laced with skepticism. Ira's gaze sharpened, determination etched in her expression. "They will. I'll send a coded distress signal only the Vey fleet can trace. The High Command doesn't abandon its own." There was a strange certainty in her voice that caught Kane off guard. She wasn't just holding on to some selfish hope, she was confident. And somehow, Kane felt there was more at play here than just her role as a diplomat's daughter. "How can you be so sure?" he asked, frowning. "The Vey aren't exactly known for their compassion." Her lips tightened, a bitter smile crossing her face. "Because they can't afford to lose me." Kane's frown deepened. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, as though weighing her words. Finally she spoke, her voice a low murmur. "I'm not just a diplomat's daughter. My father is the High Chancellor of the Vey Empire. If anything happens to me, the alliance negotiations with the Union will collapse." Kane's eyes widened. "Your royalty?" Ira shot him a sidelong glance, her expression unreadable. "In a manner of speaking. My presence is key to maintaining peace between our people. If I die, the factions opposing the alliance will push for war." Kane let out a low whistle, absorbing the weight of her words. "So, this whole mission hinges on keeping you alive. No wonder you have an entire fleet at your beck and call." Ira bristled, the passion in her voice surprising him. "This isn't about me, pilot. It's about preventing a war that could decimate both our worlds." Kane studied her, caught off guard by the depth of her conviction. Beneath the arrogance, there was a sense of responsibility he hadn't expected. She wasn't just a diplomat's daughter, she was a woman bearing the weight of a fragile peace. "And if the Vey don't arrive in time," he pressed, "we're stranded here with no shields and no weapons." Ira's violet eyes met his, all traces of superiority gone. "Then we do what we must to survive." Kane held her gaze, then nodded. "All right. Let's send the signal." Without wasting a second, Ira moved to the communications console, her fingers dancing over the holographic interface as she keyed in the encrypted distress call. Kane watched her, feeling the tension thicken in the small cockpit. Once the signal was sent, they were committed. The screen flickered, a soft hum signaling the message had gone through. Now, all they could do was wait. Kane checked the sensors, noting the faint blip of the enemy ship lurking on the edge of the asteroid field, searching. "We'd better find a safer spot," he said, gripping the controls and guiding the Tempest deeper into the asteroid field. Each jagged rock passed dangerously close to the hull, any miscalculation spelling disaster. Beside him, Ira remained silent, her gaze focused on the sensors. The hostility between them had faded, replaced by an unspoken understanding born out of necessity. Every second felt like a gamble, the enemy ship inching closer with each passing moment. Kane's grip tightened on the controls. They didn't have much time left. "Anything?" he asked, his voice tense. Ira shook her head. "Not yet. It could take time for them to pick up the signal." Kane's jaw clenched. "We don't have time. If they find us—" "They won't," she interrupted, her tone confident in a way that surprised him. "Trust me. The Vey will come." He shot her a skeptical glance but said nothing. He couldn't tell if it was stubborn optimism or genuine faith in her people's loyalty. Either way, they were in this together now. Moments later, the proximity alert blared again. Kane's stomach twisted as the enemy ship's signature grew stronger, approaching with lethal intent. "Damn it," he cursed, slamming his fist on the console. The enemy had found them, and its weapons were powering up. "Brace yourself," Kane shouted, jerking the controls to dodge incoming fire as the Tempest sped toward the heart of the asteroid field. Chapter 4: Bound by Fate. Kane swerved the Tempest through the asteroid field, but the enemy ship was relentless. Plasma rounds whizzed past, each one a hair's breadth from disaster. Just one wrong move, one lucky shot, and it would all be over. "We can't outrun them," Ira said grimly, her voice unusually tense. Kane didn't respond, focused on threading their way through the asteroids. His heart hammered in his chest as he maneuvered through the chaotic terrain, narrowly evading another blast. But just when it seemed they were out of options, a new signal appeared on the sensors. Kane's eyes widened. "Is that the Vey fleet?" Ira breathed, relief flooding her voice. "They're here." Kane could hardly believe it. A formation of sleek, angular Vey warships appeared on the sensors, advancing rapidly. The enemy ship must have detected them too, because it immediately began to retreat, knowing it was outmatched. Ira let out a breath, shoulders sagging in visible relief. "I told you they'd come." Kane allowed himself a faint smile, more a grim acknowledgement than celebration. "Yeah, you did." Yet as the Vey ships closed in to escort them out of the asteroid field, an uneasy feeling settled over him. There was more to this mission than he'd been told, much more, and Ira knew far more than she let on. He couldn't shake the feeling that their rescue would come at a price. The Vey warships flanked the Tempest, guiding them through the asteroid field. The immediate threat was over, but the tension remained. Kane's mind churned with questions, especially as he observed Ira at the communications console. She was speaking with one of the Vey commanders, her tone calm and authoritative, worlds away from the scornful diplomat's daughter who had first boarded his ship. Why had she been so certain her people would come? And why was someone like her, the High Chancellor's daughter, sent on this mission with so little protection? As they approached a rendezvous point in neutral space, Ira finished her conversation and turned to him, her expression composed, though a flicker of gratitude softened her eyes. "Thank you, Lieutenant Orson," she said quietly, as if the words were difficult to admit. "You saved my life." Kane blinked, caught off guard. Gratitude was the last thing he'd expected from her after all they'd been through. "Just doing my job," he replied, keeping his tone casual. She nodded, her gaze lingering. "This mission was more important than you realize. There are those within the Vey Empire who would see me dead, to force a war with the Union. Today, you may have just prevented that disaster." Kane leaned back, crossing his arms as he processed her words. "So, you knew we'd be attacked?" She hesitated, gaze dropping for a moment before meeting his eyes. "I suspected. My father has many enemies, and factions within the Vey Empire oppose peace. This mission was intended as a show of good faith. Some would rather see that faith destroyed." Kane exhaled slowly, piecing it together. "And you didn't think to mention this before we almost got killed?" A slight smile ghosted across her face, but there was no malice. "I didn't trust you." Kane chuckled at the irony. "Figures." She held his gaze, a hint of something softer in her eyes. "You've proven me wrong, human. You're more capable than I gave you credit for." Kane raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "Is that your way of saying I've earned your respect?" Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Perhaps." A quiet understanding passed between them, unspoken yet profound. They had faced death together, and the tension that once defined their relationship had transformed into something new. They weren't exactly friends, but they were no longer enemies either. "So, what happens now?" Kane asked quietly. "When we reach the rendezvous point, what's next for you?" Ira turned toward the viewport, her expression contemplative as she watched the stars streak by. "I'll return to my people. My father will ensure that the peace negotiations continue." "And what about those who want war?" Kane pressed. "Won't they just try again?" Her expression darkened, determination hardening her features. "They will. But now they know that humans aren't as easily manipulated as they thought." She glanced at him. "You've shown them that." Kane didn't know how to respond. He'd never seen himself as a hero, just a pilot doing his job. But hearing those words from her, someone who had once looked down on him and his people, felt unexpectedly validating. The silence stretched, but just as Kane thought the conversation was over, Ira spoke again, her voice softer. Perhaps. She paused, as if uncertain. Perhaps there's more to your kind than I realized. Kane chuckled, raising an eyebrow. That's the nicest thing you've said to me all day. Her lips quirked in a faint smile. Don't get used to it. They shared a brief look, a quiet understanding lingering between them. For a moment, it felt as though this was more than the end of a mission. It was the beginning of something else, something neither had anticipated. The comms crackled, a voice from the Vey fleet breaking the silence. Tempest, we are preparing to dock. Stand by. Ira straightened, her formal composure sliding back into place. Thank you again, Lieutenant Orson, she said, her tone official. Your service has been noted. Kane nodded, though a strange sense of loss flickered through him as she prepared to disembark. He wasn't sure why, but he didn't want this to be the last time they saw each other. Despite everything, there was something about her he couldn't quite put into words. As the docking procedure began, Kane stood by the viewport, watching the massive Vey warships moving into position. Ira and her guards prepared to leave, and just before the airlock doors closed, she glanced back one last time. Goodbye, Lieutenant Orson, she said softly. May our paths cross again under better circumstances. Kane gave her a nod, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Take care of yourself, Ira. With that, she stepped through the airlock, and the doors sealed behind her. Kane watched as the Vey ships pulled away, leaving the Tempest alone in the vastness of space. As the stars stretched out before him, he couldn't help but wonder if their paths would indeed cross again. And if they did, he had a feeling it would be for reasons neither of them could foresee. For now, though, he had a ship to repair and a mission to report. But somewhere, deep down, Kane knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning.